Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the May 20th meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Indicate for the record that all of our members are present, with Candace Anderson filling in for Federal Glover. And otherwise, we are all present and accounted for. And with that, I would like to ask you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment, and I do have one speaker card from Ralph Hoffman to speak under public comment. Welcome, Ralph.
Julie. Ralph Hoffman, and today I'm speaking as a member of a nationwide organization called the Citizens Climate Lobby. We have the Citizens Climate Lobby is a nationwide organization of volunteers who speak out at public meetings and write letters to newspapers about the harmful effects of human-caused climate change and suggest steps to reverse this. We have a Contra Costa chapter of CCL. It currently has about 16 members, and occasionally I write some poetry. My slogan is, "A meeting a day keeps greenhouse gases away." And I would also like, if you have any more of those spare the air backpacks, our members certainly would like to carry those to our meetings to spare the air in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. We appreciate your coming and reminding us that we need to be cognizant of that. So the next item on our agenda actually is a very pleasurable one, and I think I am one of the few who have been here long enough to have been here for many of the 25 years of outstanding service that we are recognizing this evening for Martin Engelman. Martin, would you join me at the microphone, please?
Who is in high school? 25
started tonight.
Yeah. Remember, Mark, you're
Too young to have 25 people.
Believe it or not, we did not forget you. And so everyone here in the audience and around the dais knows Martin has been here with us now for 25 years. Yes, he started in 1990. We have a beautiful plaque here for him, and it reads, "The Contra Costa Transportation Authority hereby congratulates Martin R. Engelman, PE, professional engineer, I assume, Deputy Executive Director for Planning, on 25 years of outstanding service, May 14th, 1990 to May 14th, 2015. Your dedicated oversight of the growth management and congestion management programs has significantly contributed to the success of Measures C and J, and that is with deepest appreciation, and is signed by me and by Randy." And so thank you, Martin. You have been one of the backbones of this organization for a very long time. It's been an honor to work with you for 25 years. Looking for a few more at least. Okay?
I thought so too. Look, yeah, Julie, from here it looked like you were hiding in Martin's jacket.
Not quite.
Mark, bring your wife up.
Do I get to say something?
Yes.
Okay.
But only if you
All
bring
right.
your wife up.
Okay. Well, when I first took the job, I told my wife, I said, "Honey, there's a night meeting on the first Wednesday, the third Wednesday, the fourth Wednesday, and sometimes on the second Thursday." And she said, "Oh, right." And there were. But in all those night meetings, she never came. So this is in 25 years. She finally came to the first CCTA meeting. I want to introduce my wife, Tricia Engelman. Stand up. And so for 25 years, she's been listening to all the stories about CCTA, and without being able to tell her those stories, I wouldn't have survived these 25 years. So thank you. I actually want to thank Ralph. He heard that Tricia Engelman was here. He said, "Oh, are you here to see your dad get an award tonight?" Thank you, Ralph. That's a good one. Fine with that. Thank you to my staff, Brad and Matt are here, and Diane. Thank you to all the other staff members. When we first got here, there were 6, and now there are 20. Special thanks to Randy Iwasaki for keeping me around the past 5 years. When he introduces me, he says, "This is Martin Engelman. He does our planning stuff, but he's okay. He's really an engineer." So I'm glad I became an engineer. And special thanks to the board. All of you have been wonderful and kind, and special thanks to Julie. Julie was here in the early 90s, and she was the chair of the board for the first countywide plan in 1995. And Don was here, and some others have been here for a long time. I know Joel Keller was here in early 90s as an Antioch rep. So, so some of you have been here as long as I have. LinkedIn is so smart. I'm on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is so smart. It sent out an announcement about my anniversary without me even knowing it. And so I started getting all these congratulations. So thank you to all the people that congratulated me on LinkedIn. Somebody has to show me how I can reply without paying the monthly fee. I go to reply and it says, well, if you want to reply, you have to pay this monthly fee. So maybe, Lindsay, can you help me work around that? So thank you very much. It's been great.
By the way, he's not retiring. He's just celebrating an anniversary.
Exactly. The kids are grown, but they still are in college. So until then.
And Martin, we hope that you can get back. We hope that you can get home by 10 tonight.
Yes, thank you again, Martin. That's really wonderful, and congratulations. We appreciate all of our staff, and we like to honor milestones when they are here, so that's wonderful. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the April 15th meeting. Any additions, corrections, or a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Tats and a second by Romick. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. The next item is the consent calendar, and there is one correction to item 2A2, and I'm going to turn to Russ for that, or Denise for that. Who's going to correct this one? It's just for a notation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director for the Authority. Yes, so there's, in your handout, there is a grammatical correction for a listing of one of the change orders. There's nothing substantive related to the costs or any other terms. It's just the way it's written in here is grammatically incorrect. The concurrence for the change order, and this is on a contract that we administer, not Caltrans. So this required concurrence of the executive board, but since it involved facilities owned by Caltrans at Antioch, they needed to concur with it as well. So it's really just a grammatical correction.
Thank you, Ross. Any other additions, corrections, or a motion for approval as amended?
So, second.
I have a motion by Taylor or a second by Romick. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The voices sound the same. So, all right. That passes unanimously as well. I have had a request that we reorder the agenda somewhat because we do have some action items that follow the major discussion items. And they should be, don't jinx it, Julie, relatively expedited. So I'm going to ask that we go to the Admin and Projects Committee, item 4A14. the CalPERS item first, and then we will go to 4A15, and then we will go back to the major discussion items, which can take a little bit longer, and we won't feel as pressured to hurry through them, perhaps.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO for the authority. The item before you is something that we brought before the APC earlier this month. It calls for a one-time use of our cash reserves of $2.2 million to pay off our pension unfunded liability. The timing in bringing this forward to you now is like all public agencies, we're facing a new accounting standard where we are now required to record the pension liabilities on our balance sheets. And we've had, well, like other agencies, we've been attending the seminars and getting prepared for that. Brian Kelleher came back from one with a fresh look at paying off this debt, and it made a lot of sense. So we brought it forward to the APC. They liked the idea of it. Some of the basic economics of it is that it's a debt, and it's going to be paid back either now as what we're recommending or over time. But we can receive a greater benefit if we pay it off now. If we infuse our pension assets by $2.2 million, we'll get the benefit of the CalPERS actuarially assumed rate of return of 7.5%. So currently we're earning about 0.5% on that money. And the investment return is an important factor to funding our pension system. It's not only the dollars that we put in, but it's the dollars that are earned on the money that we put in that help us fund our pension costs. We'll be reducing our budget each year by about $150,000, and that would grow as our pensionable salaries grow. Finally, it will, from an accountant's perspective, it will strengthen our balance sheet. It will put us in a position where we do not have a liability bogey on our balance sheet that we have to, explain, most likely to either bond investors or credit rating agencies or other readers or financial statements. So in terms of the cash reserve, it's a $6 million reserve, board approved, and we believe this is an ideal source. It's a one-time source for a one-time payment, and we do have a plan to replenish it. We would continue to earn interest on our Measure C fund balance. There's about $35 million there in Measure C that's being used to pay for the remaining projects. We believe that the interest earnings on that fund balance should be enough to pay back and replenish the $6 million reserve within about 3 years. Now, there's plenty of upsides to doing this, and I'm hard pressed really to come up with the downside of paying off our pension liability, and the only one I could really come up with is that it's not a guarantee that we won't ever have an unfunded liability again in the future. The actuary will determine how much we need to pay each year to fund our pension, and from time to time they change their assumptions. People live longer. Well, that means we pay into the pension system longer. Or if investment returns are significantly less than what they assume, there's going to be a loss that we have to make up for. I just say that in the event that when I'm up here getting my 25-year award, that and we have a pension unfunded liability, that you won't hold it against me as I'm accepting the award. If we do, I actually think the opposite is more likely, where we would have a surplus in our pension system if we do this. Surpluses in pensions in the 90s were frequently used to enhance pension benefits. With the new regulations adopted at the state level, PEPRA, we can no longer do that. So the money will not be used to enhance benefits. It would only be used to help us offset any future unfunded liabilities, or at the end of the day, if we do fold up the tent here at the authority 25 or 30 or 40 years down the road, that money would be used to go into an annuity type investment to pay off the remaining retirees. That's the staff recommendation is to give us the authority to do this, and be happy to take any questions you may have.
Candace?
And mine is less of a question, but it's just a real compliment. I'm really pleased to see this being recommended. Karen just stepped out to Sarah's board, and I currently now sit on it. And when we're looking at close to a $2 billion unfunded liability in Contra Costa with the county and various agencies, we don't see many agencies putting themselves in the position to do this. And with PEPRA, there are restrictions on enhancing benefits, and I'm hopeful that even we won't take vacations, so to speak, even when we see that we're fully funded because of the cyclical nature of the economy of pensions. It's something that I much prefer to see that we have an excess rather than find ourselves, as we may, given if we have another downturn. So I'm very supportive of this, and I'm happy to make a motion if there aren't other questions.
I think there were a couple of other questions. Chris?
Yeah, I think this is a great idea. AC Transit has its own pension for historical reasons, and I'm the board of directors representative on the pension board, so I've been doing that for about 3 years. My understanding from our actuaries is that the American Actuaries Association has adopted new tables, longevity tables, which will take effect next year. So while it's probably a good thing to pay off your current unfunded, what's your estimation about what's going to happen when those new longevity tables get put into place next year, or has CARB already put them in place?
They're not in place yet, and I'd be guessing. This is an exercise for actuaries to compute and to give us what the impacts are. But, if I were to guess, I would say probably in the range of 2 to 3% increase.
And realistically, I think we discussed at the admin committee, PERS is at least 2 years behind the times anyway. There's about a 2-year lag in the actual timing of the payments, and so it's always going to be in flux. And I would remind the authority that back in 2003-04, before we passed the last measure, we did pay up our unfunded liability at that time as well, so that if indeed the measure had failed, we would have been paid up to be able to go out of business if we needed to. And that was one of those things that PERS helped us to figure out. So we've been doing a pretty regular job of trying to keep up and not letting that accumulate. But you're right. Every time the actuaries decide that we're living longer or something else and make basic assumptions that are different, either on the earning power of the money invested or on the other actuarial tests that they use, it's going to change. But we're in a whole lot better shape than almost anybody else. Don?
Yeah, I just want to say, APC did discuss this. There was a unanimous vote to support the motion. We also, because of the opportunity CalPERS provides us to essentially earn a 7.5% return, which is better than we're doing regardless of how
That's right.
well we try and manage our investments. We had the discussion about whether we should actually almost pre-fund, and there were some regulations essentially that make that, as I recall, not attractive, which is why the recommendation was to fully fund what's there now, and if we have another deficit, to come back later. So I would be happy to second the motion.
Okay, so I have a first by Candace, a second by Don Tatson. Further discussion, Newell.
I was just going to add, being on APC, that relative to the longevity issue, part of the reason that there's an extra $400,000 in that is to help build in that cushion of what the unknown is. And I don't think it's appropriate to say unfunded. We have a liability and we're paying it. Unfunded means you can't pay it. It's not unfunded. This is a liability that we see. We're anticipating it. We're also forward thinking in helping pre-fund some of that cushion in the future. And that's $400,000, so it's almost 20%. So I think we're in the right place at the right time. It's inexpensive to do it today. So.
Very good. So we have, again, a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Randy, the next item is yours as well for A15, remarketing the 2012 A bonds.
That's right. Thank you. A little background. In 2012, we issued 2 series of bonds. To compare it to what we may understand from a home mortgage, we issued a fixed rate type mortgage, and we issued a variable rate, an ARM type mortgage. We're here tonight to talk about the ARM. We call it the floating rate notes. When we issued those notes, they had a 3-year fixed period of when of the interest rates. That ends on December 15th. Like an ARM, there's an index that moves with the market, right? And then there's a fixed spread on top of that. When we go back to market, that fixed spread gets adjusted to what the current market is. Right now, we're paying 37 basis points. It's 0.37 of 1%. In today's market, it's looking more like 0.45%, 0.5%. In dollar terms, if we were to flip those notes today in the current market, we'd be increasing our borrowing costs by about $40,000 to $50,000 a month just on that one bond transaction. So it really doesn't make sense to do this now in today's market. The reason why the market has moved away from us from when we first discussed this with the board back in February is that there's a real glut of tax-exempt muni bonds on the market. There have been a lot of agencies that issued bonds in 2005 that are coming up to their 10-year call period that are being refinanced. And when you have a situation of oversupply, it will drive down prices. Interest rates move in the opposite direction of prices, so our cost of borrowing would go up if we were to do this today. What we are recommending is that we put everything in place. We receive your approval tonight. We work with our financing team, the financial advisor, the underwriters. We give them expectations that we're looking for a break-even type of access point in the market between now and when we have to access the market, which is December 15, 2015. So we have to do something with these notes between now and then. Let me think here. Oh, the one thing I forgot to mention early on, I wanted to just say that as going through this process, we went to the rating agencies. Right? We went to Standard & Poor's, we went to Fitch, and they affirmed our AA plus bond credit rating. So that was good news. It's been released it's been put out in a press release, and we're very fortunate to be a public agency to have that high of a credit rating. So it's with staff recommendation that we hold steady on this transaction. We get everything in place and ready to go. And when interest rates improve, we will access the market and get this thing fixed out for another 3, 4, or 5 years.
Second.
I have a motion by Mitchoff, a second by Tatson. Any further discussion?
Hand up from Randy. No.
Don't get in the way of approval. All right. Any further discussion from the commissioners? Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And when Peter Schellenberger comes in just about 2 seconds, you can tell him we're done. Thank you, Peter. We just approved the item.
The traffic's easier the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's go back to item 3, which is our major discussion item. And this is Ross's item here, and this is the development of the Transportation Sales Tax Transportation Expenditure Plan, the TEP. And I'm going to let Ross kick this off, and then I'll fill in a little bit as we go along as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, again, my name is Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director for the Authority. And if you don't mind, I'd like to stand up here and make the presentation instead of sitting at the table. I've done this a few times. One, I might need to take off my jacket or roll up my sleeves, or I'm losing my tie, so I'd probably be able to do that better if I'm standing here. So I'm, as Chair mentioned, the next 4 items are action items related to the next steps that we will undertake with your approval in the development of a transportation expenditure plan. So we've had some conversation over that the last few months. And I've been out starting to talk about this process, and what I've discovered is that there really isn't a clear understanding of why we're out doing this at this point in time. So I kind of regrouped a little bit and put together kind of a call to arms of why we're undertaking that. So I'd like to walk through this presentation as an introduction to these items. So this is really an introductory item prior to the actions that we're going to be asking you to take today. And then once we're complete with that and address any questions you have, I'll kind of orchestrate a discussion with help of others to get us through those items. So again, this is really to help explain to others, and I think it's important for us to remind ourselves why we're actually doing that. So that's the purpose of this presentation. That works. So what I'd first like to do is just go back down memory lane. Martin should be up here doing this. I wasn't around back in these days, but I can tell some stories from what I understand. Back in 1988, the authority was formed with the passage of Measure C. And Measure C carried us, Measure C was passed after a time of limited funding from the state and from the federal government. Kind of sounds familiar here. So the county took it upon themselves to join with Santa Clara, who was the first county to pass a sales tax. We were the second. And we did that through Measure C. And Measure C was a 20-year half-cent sales tax. And it really was to backfill a backlog of demand for projects. So one of the things that I wanted to put into this discussion here was Measure C was about 70% of the investment was for large capital infrastructure type projects, and about 30% of it was what we refer to as the programs, return to source. We did start some bus assistance, some transit assistance, but it was primarily related to infrastructure, trying to catch up in a growing county with underinvestment. Seeing the end of the tunnel for Measure C, this authority here, working with stakeholders throughout the county, passed Measure J. So Measure J was passed in 2004, and it was an extension of Measure C. Many of the same policies continued. One of the major differences, it was a 25-year term, so the revenues began in 2009 and continued to 2034. The other, in addition to an extended term, the other major change between Measure C and Measure J was kind of a flip from less investment into infrastructure. Our infrastructure was starting to mature, and more investment into programs. So we had about 40% of the revenue available for projects, and it's a key point. You'll hear why I'm harping on that a little bit, and about 60% for annual programs. So those annual programs will continue as a percent of net revenue all the way through 2034. And Measure J is really what allowed us certainly to invest heavily into Caldecott Tunnel, continue the expansion or almost completion of the widening on Highway 4, E-BART extension, et cetera. By the addition of a lot of the programs in Measure J and in our role as the congestion management agency for Contra Costa, we really expanded the services that we provided. So this is a nice graphic that Lindsay and her team put together with a little icon and a description. You can see that we really do invest in a multimodal system where Measure C was really building out our road network to a great extent, although Measure C did extend BART out to Pittsburgh Bay Point. Now we're really investing in a lot of alternative modes of transportation. So that's what this is trying to represent, is that we're trying to fit the needs of a wide variety of transportation users in the county. So I want to, at this time, really focus in on the 40% of Measure J that's available for investment in the larger capital infrastructure type projects. So this is a slide that you've probably seen before and heard us talk about. This is really what we call our strategy for success. We get projects shovel ready. So we're starting the environmental, sometimes starting the design on projects prior to them being ready for or fully funded for construction, because occasionally money does fall out of the sky, and we want to be prepared to take advantage of that when that opportunity presents itself. As Randy just talked about here, we finance and bond against our revenue. That was a policy decision that you as a body made, and that served us well. And again, we'll see that in a minute. And then we've maintained great relationships with our funding partners and leverage other funds. So certainly that's something I think that our executive director has brought in here and has served us well over the last 5 years or so. We've cozied up with MTC, try to keep in touch with the state. Certainly we've had some success in competing for grants out of Washington. So a lot of that is, well, really it's a combination of having great projects to invest in, but there's some relationship piece of it too. So we made a conscious effort to do that. Combine that, these strategies, and really a timing of when Measure J was passed, we've been able to leverage a tremendous amount of funds from Prop 1B era and some of the other things I'm talking about. It. For those of you that are on APC, you've seen this chart before, and maybe the whole authority has, I don't recall. This is the revenue trend in our budget over the last several years. The blue bars represent the total Measure J revenues. And as you notice, if Randy was up here talking, he'd say he was hired in 2010. And we see an increasing line the whole time here. He wants to take credit for that. Those of you that are following the economy might have a different theory, but I'm not going to argue with that.
He's responsible for the whole economy.
But maybe there is some credit in the red line. So the red bar represents the amount in our budget, our annual budget, that's from other revenues, or revenues other than Measure J. So that really has increased, and that's something we're very proud of and want to continue with that. So if you forecast that out through the completion of the Measure J program, you see what's trying to be represented here in this pie chart. Again, part of it, the timing could not have been better. I don't know if you had a crystal ball, saw Prop 1B coming, the Recovery Act. We have about a $2.5 billion capital program to complete that. We're trying to complete that with about a 25% investment of Measure J and about 75% investment from contributions from others. We still have that green wedge to work on, but that's our goal, to try to get as much of that green wedge covered by other funds to complete this program. Putting all this together, bonding, leveraging, this is something we're referring to as our fiscal cliff, or in other contexts, we're referring to this in 25 and 10. This is a spending pattern that shows we're implementing a 25-year capital program in Measure J in 10 years. The upper blue line represents our total Measure J revenues, annual, and that increase is a combination of inflation and economic growth. The lower line horizontal line represents the roughly 42% that we have available for capital projects, and that's an amount that we can bond against. The green line represents our spending to complete those projects. So essentially, through the bonding that Randy just talked about, we've moved that space, that area between the lower blue line and the green line in the outer years to create this peak in the early years, and that's what's allowing us to complete, or and I wouldn't say it's allowing us, but it's certainly the bonding is part of what allows us to complete a 10-year or 25-year program in 10 years. This isn't just accelerating spending. This is accelerating the delivery of projects and the benefits that come with those projects. Certainly one way to look at it, or an analogy that most folks can understand is, I doubt if any of you have saved up cash before you've bought a house. So you decide early in your life that you'd like to join home ownership, and choices, you save up until you have enough cash to buy it, or you go to the bank and you take out a mortgage. So this is the borrowing that we did to deliver Caldecott, Highway 4, EBART, and the other major projects that are in Measure J. Certainly, from my perspective, and I think a perspective of many of the staff and public out there, it was a wise decision, and again, combine it with the timing so we could leverage all those other dollars that were available. This fits, this really frames where we are. We've accomplished a lot, but we don't have capital revenue in Measure J to continue building our infrastructure. So the question before us is, do we want to continue our capital program? Do we have capital needs, project needs are unfunded in the county? If the answer to that, what are we going to do? This is another chart that you've seen very often. This is the percent of spending or investment for transportation in California in the various sources. In the old days, about 80% of the spending came from the federal government. That's now down to roughly 12 or 13%. The state, their amount is dwindling. It's now down to about 22%. There's 65% there, and this is statewide. This is primarily from self-help counties and locally imposed taxes, and from tolling revenue, whether it's the bridges or other toll facilities. So this is I hate keeping showing us this picture over and over, but this is something that kind of shows the importance of local investment. This is a slide that kind of puts it together and frames the whole self-help county movement in California. Again, Santa Clara County was the first. We were the second out of the gate. Now we have 20 counties representing 81% of the population in California that have gone this path of self-help. So there's 58 counties. I believe there's 58 counties. We have 20 of the 58 counties, but more impactful is that those counties represent 81% of the population. So it's virtually every urban county, most suburban counties. They've recognized the need to look inward and decide that we need to help ourselves to build in some of this investment or need for investment that we're no longer can get out of Sacramento or from Washington. So as part of our discussion, trying to mull over what do we do with the fiscal cliff, as part of the countywide transportation effort, we decided that we would ask the public of their interests or willingness, or actually this first question is their opinion about whether additional investment is needed in our transportation system. So this is a result, a countywide result in the top line, and then the regional results from this polling question. And this picture here is very common through almost every poll you see related to transportation investment. You're always going to hear at least 75% of the people say, yes, we need to invest more dollars in transportation. It's when you get to the next question where you start to have a little more trouble, is how do we pay for it? So knowing that we've had tremendous success in the poll, and this was a telephone survey that Bill and his team administered about 14 months ago, we put in a question that was read to folks over the poll. That shaded area is exactly 75 words, and bonus points if you know why it's 75 words. And we asked about would the public be willing to increase and extend the locally imposed sales tax if certain outcomes would be part of that investment. And we had 68% of the people who expressed a positive response to that question. I should have said earlier, part of the self-help initiatives or requirements for self-help measures is 67, or it's 2/3, so it's 66.67% of the people who vote must vote affirmative. So here we have, we're right on the line. So that's what gave you as a body the willingness to actually start a dialogue with the public about whether we need additional investment, and if an increase in extension of Measure J is the right vehicle to do that. So I'm going to take a sip of water and take a pause. I'm not finished with the presentation, but I'd just like to pause and see if there's any question from you about why we're undertaking this path.
Karen.
Ross, the question I would have on this approve the increase by 0.5 cent and extend the existing county sales tax, to the question, or is there a follow-up question of how long to extend, or we just left it open-ended?
Yeah, we did not put
Okay.
in that level of detail, but obviously that's a discussion we have to have.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was just, as you read it there, it's really, would you be willing to increase and extend? But the bullets that are in the middle there are specific improvements. If you can't see it, expand BART, improve transit, and so forth. So it's written the way we would do it under our promises made, promises kept mantra. We tell the voters what we're going to do, and we do it.
Any other questions? Okay.
So with that backdrop, I'm going to talk over the next few slides about development of the transportation expenditure plan. You've directed staff over the last few meetings to look at the activities and the costs of what it would take. So we're going to start that discussion. First thing we're going to do is we're going to use what we learned. So this is, again, another nice, and this is a handout in your on the DS. You've hopefully seen this before. Very nice one-page, two-side summary of what we heard through the countywide transportation process. So kudos to Lindsay and her team and Bill and his team for putting this together. One side is top 6 items that came out from the public as they expressed their opinion in this process. Very similar to what we saw in the poll that I showed there. We did also ask about the priorities for investment. That original poll was BART, access to BART, better BART, fix your roads, address potholes and so forth, and traffic smoothing. And those came out again, as well as other items. So these are the top 6. And we got that through tremendous public participation. So that's what the other side shows. Shows that we had a variety of engagement tools. We had the old-fashioned in-person workshops, very successful telephone town hall, and a very interesting online tool that we're going to continue to use that had over 4,000 people invest their time to come in and tell us their opinions about how we should be investing our dollars. So we're not going to get rid of all that. We're going to build on what we learned, and build on it in 2 ways: is keep testing these as a priority investments, but also continue with the interested public. We gained the public's interest through the countywide transportation plan. We want to continue their interest as we go through this process. So we'll do that, and then I want to go through the elements of what's in the plan itself. And this list of bullets here frames much of what's on your agenda. Many more things will need to come. One of the items we'll be discussing later is the principles document, a document titled Principles for Development of a Transportation Expenditure Plan. We discussed that last month, and we're bringing that back to you, incorporating what we hope are the results of the comments that we received last month. We need to ultimately come on an amount and a term. And that gets to Supervisor Mitchoff's question. What are we talking about? Is it a half a cent, a quarter cent? Is it 10 years, 20 years, 25 years? So we're going to start that dialogue with you here tonight. We need to, in the promises made, promises kept mode, we need to tell the voters what we're going to do. So we need to define the specific projects and programs that we will invest in if the public's willing to entrust us with their money. And Hisham will lead us on a discussion to kick that process off with the regional bodies. Other competing priorities. So when we started this process, we were hearing about many other entities that are possibly headed towards the same election to raise revenues locally. Certainly many of your jurisdictions may be doing that before the time we go to the ballot, or maybe on the same ballot. We've heard that BART may be talking about some form of a ballot initiative that may be on the same ballot. We're understanding that AC Transit may be also looking at going to the ballot sometime within the same time period, or maybe on the same ballot. Up to 9 counties in Northern California are discussing going to the ballot at the same time we may be going to the ballot. MTC is talking about a need for additional revenue. Don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but as this information comes out, becomes readily available to the public, we need to be coordinating with those agencies, making sure if we're on the same ballot as complementary, or making decisions that maybe we need to step aside or someone else needs to step aside and see who could go first. So we'll clearly be watching the ballot as we go through the process. And then there'll be many other considerations that we'll bring to you over time. I'm going to skip over this. I'll hit these bullets as we're looking at a schedule here. The schedule is arranged to develop the transportation expenditure plan iteratively over about 4 cycles. So we're entering the first cycle where we'll be engaging certainly the regional transportation planning committees. We've started that process. I've been to all the RTPCs. Hisham's been to, I believe it's 3 of the 4 TACs. So we're starting to collect that information. We're going to be asking you to consider chartering an external expenditure plan advisory committee. So that's one of the other items that'll be on the agenda today. That's a group of cross-representative group of folks who could come in and help us or advise us on the development of a transportation expenditure plan from a perspective outside of the transportation community. So again, we'll talk more about that when we get to that item. We want to make sure that we continue with our outreach activities. I think we're going to try to get as much input direct from the public as we can. We'll use our advisory committees, the kind of inside baseball folks, but we want to test all of that directly with the public through the tools that Lindsay has put together, through polling, et cetera. The goal is to have we're calling a discussion draft of a transportation expenditure plan available in November for us to consider and publicly unveil to the public and our stakeholders, and start collecting comments on that. That's going to be a big rush. January, we hope to have solidified that into a draft that we can really circulate through the jurisdictions. We'll want to come out and meet with the councils. We'll want to go to many stakeholder groups, refine that plan, again, work it through the regional committees. What we need to shoot for, and if we want to make the 2016 ballot,
We need to have a plan that we're ready to adopt, a real final plan that we're ready to adopt by May of 2016. Process after that is if you approve it, we need to circulate it with the county, get the Board of Supervisors, and the majority of the cities representing the majority of the population. Of course, to be successful, we need unanimity. Our goal would be that we could get all jurisdictions on board, that this is something that they could back. If that happens, then we formally adopt the plan, adopt an ordinance, and send it back to the Board of Supervisors with a request to place it on a ballot. So again, that'll be a very busy period in the May through July time period next year to gain that widespread support. As I'm out talking to folks, and I normally do this as I kick this off, the message we want to leave, as we've discussed in our meetings over the past couple of months, your direction to staff is to develop a plan and plan for the plan, which we're looking at here, and an expenditure plan. You have not made a decision about placing this on the ballot. That's a decision to be made later, and certainly is something that would be made collectively with all our stakeholders, and ultimately the Board of Supervisors and the majority of the jurisdictions need to come with us to do that. So a lot of work ahead of us. Time to roll up our sleeves, and I'd entertain any general questions about the presentation here, and then once we address those, we'll dive into the action items.
Any questions of Ross at this point? All right, let's dive into the action items.
All right.
We have a series of them this evening.
Yes. So now I'm gonna sit down. So,
So the first item, it's item 3.1 in your packet, is the principles for development of a transportation plan. Again, as I mentioned in my presentation, this is a repeat of a discussion that occurred at the last authorities meeting. The staff and our consultant team are recommending that we develop and adopt this set of principles. Again, setting up the principles built from the vision and goals adopted in the countywide transportation plan. We don't want to lose that effort. And as you read through those principles, many of them are what I would describe as elements of our DNA. These are things that you hold near and dear as we get into these major efforts. Things such as transparency, accountability, collaborative or cooperative planning. Those are throughout. As we presented these at last month's meeting, there were a number of comments made by commissioners, and those comments, if you would like to see those, they're recorded in the minutes that Denise prepared for the meeting. So if you want to cross-reference to see if we built your comments into the final version, we may be able to do that. Your packet includes a clean version. That would be the version that you would read if you adopt as the principles tonight, as well as a red line version, so you can see the changes made from last month. The changes are primarily in principle number 5 and 6, and we added a new principle 10 for technology and innovation. Summary of that is our language is more definitive about greenhouse gas reduction, tying transportation to safety, and several other factors. As I've mentioned, I've been out to all the RTPCs. I believe that I've addressed most, if not all, the comments that were received at those meetings. I received, majority of the comments that I received were at the WICTAC and the SWAT meetings. Summary of the WICTAC comments is that they were very much in support of the goals for a reduction in greenhouse gases, to align the TEP with Senate Bill 375 goals. I believe the SWAT comments are addressed in these principles, and members that were present at that meeting can either confirm or correct the principles if we haven't been able to do that. A lot of the comments that I received really were just put in this project or that project, so it really wasn't applicable for a principles document itself. One comment I just call out for consideration is this came from the Pair Transit Coordinating Council. Request that there is a principle that specifically mentions the needs of people with disabilities or other folks in our society that they feel are often overlooked. That may be included in item 5, the balance. We'll have to decide that. So, at any rate, staff's recommendation is that we adopt the principles as they're presented here tonight. These are a starting point. It's been a collaborative effort over about the last 4 or 5 months, working with stakeholders, the ad hoc committee, your comments. Certainly, these are not cast in stone. We'll learn a lot through the process, and if we find we need to adjust these, we will bring them back to you to do that. So I'll leave that with my comments and recommend that you adopt the principles as presented.
Thank you, Ross. I would just add on to what Ross has said that the intent of these principles is, as we recall from our previous meetings, to be a starting point for the discussions with our stakeholders. They are not meant to be the be-all, end-all, to be wordsmithed into perfection at this stage of our process. They are to be the beginning of the discussion, framing the things that we expect to be important to our stakeholders, but leaving room for them to refine them. So I'm going to start over on this side and just kind of come around if there are comments. Don?
Thank you, and thank you to the staff and the committee for making the amendments. I think they're very good. The one question I had was about item 6, public health and safety. Talks about reducing transportation impacts on the environment, and in other portions of the overall documents we've received this evening, it talks about per capita impacts. And so are you fairly comfortable that we actually can reduce this implies total impacts. So are you comfortable we can reduce total impacts?
I think it covers it. The discussion on related to reduction in greenhouse gases, and there was a version that I discussed with some of the RTPCs that had a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. We may see vehicle miles traveled increase, particularly within a world of connected vehicles. That's a prediction that some folks have. We just need to make sure we do that in an environmentally responsible manner, particularly with the emergence of electric vehicles and alternative fuels. Certainly the trend is that even with additional miles traveled, if we do it correctly, we can see the reduction in greenhouse gases.
I understand the greenhouse gas, but this talked about environmental impacts, so it's noise, it's visual impacts, it's everything else, so it's not just greenhouse gases.
Yeah, so I think we're trying to use broad statements that will cover many factors. So as in any plan, total and cumulative effects on the environment need to be considered.
Okay. Thank you, Don. Any other comments on this side? Okay, we'll come over here, Newell. And I do have 2 comments from the public as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dawn. I think we've done a good job in wordsmithing this already. But on the health one on item 6, I think that's right. It should be general at this point in time because there's a lot of state laws and things that we still have to comply with. And it's an evolving. I just spent the past 5 days in Atlanta talking about the environment in ways I never thought we would, and making deep fundamental changes in everything we produce, whether it be food production, materials for buildings. And, there's a seriousness about doing that. It's kind of like when gas got up to $5 a gallon, we said, wow, we better figure out how to conserve electric cars. And the same thing, we're at a point in time, I think, with the environment that it's everywhere you go, people are feeling changes. I think this is just right at this point in time, and I wouldn't change anything because otherwise we'll never get through this. But I do think we all had a good opportunity to comment on this, and it will guide us. And again, as our wordsmither next to me said, this is just gently, quietly, he said, this is principles. It's not finite. We will come out with details, and one of them may be we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled or we want to increase, and here's the offset. This gives us a guiding principle. So I'm comfortable. I would be willing to move the item when we get to it.
When we get to it. All right, I do have two comments from the public. Ralph Hoffman.
Ralph Hoffman, once more. I know you all are nonpartisan, but 2016 is a presidential election year, which means it will be a very high turnout year, which is good for increasing this tax. And there is a little debate going on in Congress right now about the federal tax, which is, I think, going to run out the end of this month. And, there is, I can't remember which party is, but one party is opposed to it, and one party is in favor of, the federal tax. And, of course, as I say, you all are nonpartisan, but, if you, write your congressman or senator about that, we really need badly this state tax because of what's happening in Congress right now. So I'm very much in favor of doubling this state sales tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And the other comments from Dave Campbell with Bike East Bay. And you wanted to comment on 3.1 and 3.2 separately or together?
Together.
This is 3.1.
Together.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm the advocacy director with Bike East Bay. We work to make Contra Costa County and Alameda counties more bikeable. And we're ready to direct our resources in a big way to increasing transportation funding in Contra Costa County. We learned a lot from doing so in Alameda County the last 2 times. And we don't bring a lot of money to the table, but we bring lots of volunteers to the table. And they're ready to deploy in Contra Costa County to call your voters, to call your residents, to walk the precincts, to get those lawn signs out there, to harass each and every one of you who's also running for re-election in 2016 to make sure you're carrying the message of R2 to your voters along with your own message. Surprisingly, not every candidate did that in Alameda County. We're gonna do better than they did in that respect. We're also ready to hound your public works departments with your help, we hope, to get them out on the campaign trail as volunteers, of course, not as public servants, because we're going to be doubling their budgets. These are lessons learned, and that's what we're bringing to the table. We're looking forward to putting together a plan that we can support. Alameda County roughly got about 12 to 14% funding for bike ped projects. I think we can do better than that here in Contra Costa County. We also are looking for a strong commitment to transit. But the main goal is to give people options. If they want to take transit, if they want to walk or bike, they should have the ability to do that if they choose. And if they choose to drive, they should be able to do that without getting stuck in traffic. My final comment is the polling. We're very much committed to honoring the voter sentiment. And gosh darn it, we learned a couple hard lessons in Alameda County about that. And we don't want to repeat that because it's a waste of time. If the voters won't support something, or if they will, let's make sure we put together a plan that reflects that and get it right one time and not have to go back to the voters. Because we know it's going to be tough. If there's 9 counties out there in the state, that's going to be pulling campaign contributions away from us. If AC Transit and BART and MTC are going to the ballot at the same time or near to that time, that's competition. And certainly each of your cities may be considering local revenues, and we need to get your cities those local revenues. So it's going to be a tall battle, but we have to honor the voter sentiment. We're ready to do that. Let's all agree at some point, maybe tonight, that we'll do that. And join hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate your comments. I do want to clarify for the public who may be listening, no decision has been made yet on whether we are going to any ballot yet. We are still in the very beginning of this process to put together a transportation expenditure plan to figure out what those priorities are, and we want all of the public to be engaged and active in that process. Sometime late next spring, early summer is when we will make that final decision whether or not we have a plan that is viable and whether it is the time to approach the public for any ballot measure. So just want to be really, really clear, we're not there yet, but I appreciate the enthusiasm and the excitement about the possibilities that have been expressed this evening, because that really is wonderful. So other comments? Newell, did you have a comment?
No, I'm willing to make a motion.
Any
unless there's
other
comments.
discussion points, Chris?
This is just a comment that something both speakers said makes me feel I need to make this comment, and that is, as important as these sales taxes are, and I'm fully supportive, and AC Transit will be fully supportive if you go out. It's very frustrating that both at the state and the federal level, we have been unable to even index gas taxes for inflation since 1993. And I think that's, Randy and I were both at the Stand Up for Transit event last month, and it looks like there's a 2-month extension in Washington, and that's just not fulfilling their responsibilities.
That's right. Thank you, Chris. Don, did you have a comment?
No, I'll just second the motion.
Okay. So,
I moved as presented in the staff report.
all right, thank you. First by Arnrich, a second by Tatson. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Okay, 3.1 carries unanimously. Onward.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll kick this off and turn this one over for discussion. One of the things we've discussed previously as we've started this dialogue is that we really have an opportunity here as we develop the Transportation Expenditure Plan to coordinate with other efforts that are underway. The Regional Transportation Plan, that's actually kicking that process off. It was a consent item in your agenda, and we'll hear more about that later on the agenda. 3.2 is a discussion about an opportunity to coordinate wrapping up our countywide transportation plan with the transportation expenditure plan effort. So Martin is up here, and he'll walk us through this discussion.
Thank you, Ross. Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at CCTA, and thank you again for the beautiful plaque. It really is beautiful. As you know, we've been working on the 2014 countywide plan for some time now, and the original schedule, we brought it to TCC back in June of 2014, and we took it to the authority in July. We released the draft in August, and that was a 2014 CTP that looked at the comprehensive transportation project list, which is the vision list of all projects under the sun. Came up with a price tag of $12.4 billion for that vision list. We subsequently released a draft supplemental environmental impact report in September, and had a 45-day review period for that. And by about December, we had all the comments in on the draft plan, and we were poised to adopt it in March of 2015. As you know, based upon some comments that we received, we were asked to consider prioritizing that $12.4 billion list of projects. And as we get closer to developing a transportation expenditure plan, as that concept starts to gel, we're being advised by our legal counsel that it would be best to kind of join the countywide transportation plan with the TEP, and instead of having separate CEQA project reviews, have one environmental document that looks at both the countywide plan, the comprehensive list of $12.4 billion, and that smaller list of $2.3 billion for the transportation expenditure plan. So based upon that suggestion, we're proposing to you tonight a revised schedule for the countywide plan. And that is listed on your packet on page 3.2-2. I'll direct your attention to the table that starts at the bottom of that page. And what we're suggesting is that during June, July, through November, we work with EPAC and the RTPCs and stakeholders to develop a discussion draft TEP. The first column shows what's happening with the TEP. And during that time, we do a performance evaluation of the projects and programs that are in our CTP using MTC's performance targets, which are also shown in your packet as attachment A. This will be a qualitative evaluation of projects and programs that are greater than $50 million in cost. So we'd be looking at the big ticket items to see how well they perform using MTC's performance criteria. As we discuss the TEP and develop it, the authority is expecting to release a discussion draft TEP in November 2015. And based upon that discussion draft, we will have designed a revised draft CTP and draft SEIR for release in January 2016. Exactly what's contained in those documents is yet to be determined, and certainly the alternatives that are in the environmental document are yet to be determined. So assuming in January we can release the draft countywide plan and SEIR, we'd have the 45-day review period in February and March, and start preparing responses in April. On May 18th of 2016, you would certify the final CTP, SEIR, adopt the final CTP, and then you could adopt the final TEP and forward the expenditure plan and ordinance out to the cities and counties for review. So then that would allow us to publish the final CTP probably in July, in time for your July 20th meeting. So this slips the schedule by a year and a couple of months. It means that we're going to have to recirculate the draft environmental document. There is a work plan that comes along with this. There's a cost associated with this. We're assessing that cost. We would bring in June to the Planning Committee the work plan and the cost. It's going to include amendments to at least 3 consultant agreements so that they can continue on a longer schedule with a second deliverable now. And by the end of June, we should be in motion with all the consultants on board, assuming that we can work out the process through the June PC meeting and authority. So with that, I'll ask for your questions and comments.
Questions, Karen?
I believe I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure that I do know it and for our public. In doing one CEQA document, which I believe is an efficient use of time and what have you, should we, because we're now combining the TEP with the CTP, will there be enough, I guess I'll use the word division, but should we choose not to move forward with the sales tax issue and the TEP, can the CTP still stand on its own with that CEQA document? And everybody's shaking their head yes, and I'm assuming that's the case, but I want to make sure that's the case.
We'll make sure that's the case.
Okay, thank you, because that's all we need to do is, should we choose not to move forward, but we still need to do the CTP, that's one of the concerns I believe is currently before us, so I want to make sure, maybe independent is a different adjective to describe it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Don?
Thank you. Martin, I think you answered my question, but just let me make sure. So I was curious as to how the performance targets would be utilized. So if I recall what you said is it would be a qualitative assessment. So does that mean that, for example, if I've got a project, you're evaluating a particular project against target 2 of adequate housing, you would say it improves adequate housing, it has no effect one way or another, or it may detract from adequate housing? be that kind of assessment?
Well, at this point, we're talking about a qualitative assessment. We probably don't have the time or the tools to really do a detailed quantitative investment. So qualitative. And what we'd like to do, actually, if you approve this item tonight, is go out to our CTP task force. I know you have a CTP ad hoc now called TEP ad hoc. We also have a CTP task force comprised of planners and engineers from around the county and the RTPC managers. And we'd like to bring them this proposal to do the evaluation and figure out, given that this is the criteria, given that we want to do qualitative, what are the ordinals of judgment? And it might be, a smile, a frown, or, thumbs up, thumbs down, but we have yet to decide on the exact nature of that. But it'll be done through the...
Thank you. And with that, I would be happy to move the item when it comes up.
Okay, any further questions of staff?
I just think we need to write that phrase down and use it regularly.
Ordinals
Ordinals of
of
judgment.
judgment.
That was beautiful. It's a great moment.
All right, let me ask first if there's any public comment on this item. I don't have any speaker cards. Seeing no one wave, we have a motion by Tatson and a second by Arnrich. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Martin. Okay, the next item is the approval of the Transportation Expenditure Plan, Sales Tax Revenue Estimate, and Regional Transportation Planning Committee funding targets, and to initiate the TEP call for projects. Hisham.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. This is an action item in front of you. Before we can begin developing the draft tip, we need to make some assumptions about the new sales tax measure terms. To start the discussion, staff is proposing similar terms to Measure J, where a half a percent sales tax would be imposed over 25 years, starting on April 1st, 2017 and ending on March 31st, 2042. Such a measure would raise approximately $2.3 billion in constant 2014 dollars. Attachment A on page 3.3-5 of your packet shows projected revenues under various terms, including the one recommended by staff. We think shorter terms than 25-year will not allow the authority to meet the needs of the county. The revenue estimates are based on the same financial assumptions that you had just approved for the development of the 2015 Measure J strategic plan as part of agenda item 2A7. It's on the consent agenda. To begin developing the TIP, the Transportation Expenditure Plan, staff is proposing a bottoms-up approach where input will be sought from the regional transportation planning committees on their priorities. Similar to Measure J, we propose to use ABAC population estimate at the mid-year of the measure, which is year 2030, to come up with each RTPC share of the $2.3 billion. Each RTPC will then be asked to devise a plan on how to spend their shares based on their needs. The RTPC's shares are shown in Table 2 on page 3.3-3 of your packet. As Ross mentioned, the RTPCs will be one of the stakeholders the authority will be seeking input from. We will also be seeking input from the EPAC, the Authority Advisory Committees, and the public while we are developing the discussion draft of the TIP. Staff is proposing to initiate the RTPC's call for projects now to coincide with the RTPC discussion of what projects to include in MTC's Regional Transportation Plan, or the RTP. The RTP discussion will help set the stage for the TIP, as each RTPC will know which priority projects and programs are not expected to be funded from existing revenue fund sources, state, federal, and other local, during the RTP period, which is a 24-year period, and which projects would be good candidates to be funded by a new measure. The draft call for projects is included in Attachment B in your packet to help with the RTPCs. We are providing them with information on polling results so they'll know which projects resonate well with their voters, the list of current Measure J projects that still have funding shortfalls, and the allocation amounts that we currently put to Measure J programs. Using the input of the RTPCs, which is requested by July 24th, which is the same deadline that we are asking for the RTP input as well, staff will be able to compile a draft expenditure plan for the authority to review in September. You will be able to see the commonalities between the proposals, which will help you identify countywide programs as well as any marquee projects that will help us carry the measure. With that, staff requests your approval of the revenue estimate as well as the sub-regional targets and the call for projects.
Thank you, Hicham. Janet.
Yes, I have a question in the identification of the countywide projects. So, for example, if you pick anything, let's just start out with the top transplant, and it shows if it went out to 2035, 361. That's actually...
That's the population.
Oh, that's the population. I'm sorry, go down to the next chart. 660 million. Okay. Then that would be if the entire measure went to the sub-regional groups, right?
No. That's their share based on the mid-year of the population.
To answer your question, Janet, yes, that's
Okay.
assuming that you took the entire amount of money and divided it regionally by population without a over the top across the board amount. And the reason we're doing that is to see what commonalities come from the regional groups that would go into across the county programs and projects.
Okay.
And so by finding out from each of the regions what's important, we'll figure out what needs to go into countywide projects and programs.
For example, if everyone wanted 10% of the money to go to buses, let's say, then that would be a countywide item ultimately.
It could very well be, but we're asking each region to prioritize based on the amount of money represented by their population, what's
Okay.
important, and then it'll come back to us to help figure out.
Okay.
And not just us, but there are a lot of other groups that are going to be putting feedback
Right.
into this as well. But
Okay.
that's what we're thinking, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Russ?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I could expand a little bit on that as well, and some of the other folks we've been in discussions with. So going into this, what we're really trying to do is to really drive the needs through the regional committees as much as possible, because we know that there's diversity in the needs throughout the county. But with respect to some of the countywide plans, some of the folks that have approached us, both the City County Engineers Group as well as the Public Managers Association Group, each have formed subcommittees to represent kind of a jurisdictional need, and we welcome that. And they can get together and come up with a base that would be for a countywide program for return to source, for example, or any other needs that are common across all the jurisdictions. We want them to kind of advocate to you to reserve a certain amount of this target that you have here for that purpose. Similar, Peter and I have just initiated some discussions with a transit operator. Similarly, the transit properties aren't necessarily completely aligned with the regions, but several of them are pretty close. So there seems to be a good fit there as well. I understand your question. If we're asking what are the specific projects and programs in West County, you probably don't have the entire target that's shown there for WICTAC, but we want you to consider all these other needs that will ultimately end up in countywide programs as you're making those trade-off decisions. So we really want to empower the RTPCs, and that's why we're showing the entire target and want to help folks that come to us, work through your processes so that you're making those decisions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Karen, and then Dawn.
I may be thinking way too far ahead. Since this is 25 years, that extends to 2042, so that's 7 years longer than the current, aren't we 2035 or 2034?
4.
Okay, so it's 8 years longer. So if we approve this tonight, which I don't have a problem with, that then, and I'm looking at Mala again, that'll be addressed should we go out for the measure to align those two. In other words, right now we're getting a half cent. I hear what you're talking about, if we approve it, is in 27, and the measure passes, in 2017 we would get 1 cent. We're not going to end half of that cent on 2034 and then continue another half cent for another 7 years. Is that the plan? Which is fine. That's great. Okay, that's what we're looking at. We're not looking at 1 cent from 2017 to 2042. We're looking at 1 cent from 2017 to 2034, and then 2034 to 2042, a continuation of half. I think that'll be a real critical thing to make clear. And there may be future elected officials who change that. Candace and I are dealing with that now with a former colleague who seems to think that things are set in perpetuity. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Dawn?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to us, and I like the approach. I think that the estimated allocations by sub-region make sense. I suspect that for some jurisdictions, the timing of July 24th could be a little tight, but I would imagine everyone's going to be close. There are two things of additional information I'd like to suggest that you see if you can provide. In particular on Exhibit C, my recollection is that when we developed the Measure J program list, there were some programs that were countywide, but there were some programs that were specific to an RTPC, and then they were allocated to a portion of the countywide sales tax. So when you send a list to an RTPC, it would be good for them to be reminded which ones they're getting money from, and then try to figure out, well, what percentage of their total budget that was. So, for example, in SWAT, we have funding for 2 school bus transportation programs. And so for us, the percentage of our money that goes to those programs is a lot higher than is represented on average for the measure. So I'd like to do that. And then to the extent you could, if you could do the same thing for Exhibit B. Because the unfunded parts were originally part of a particular RTPC project list.
Okay. Any other questions? Ralph Hoffman, you have a comment.
Yes, Ralph Hoffman again. I was born in 1942, and when I come back in 2042, to extend this tax,
We'll throw you a birthday party.
I'll be 100 years young. Yes, I may not have any hair left, but to die, but I'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. You might be the only one of us who's still here in 2042. Okay, any other questions from the board? Yes? Yes, Newell?
I was involved in the last Measure J. I think the framework was right. July is really challenging because these are something that, while we might put them on the list, we've got to get them to get them lined up for the environmental work. But they need to be tested too. Also on, I represent the 19 cities, so high-level view, by population is one way to do it, but we might be thinking that there may be some way, there are certain areas that are donors and certain areas that are getting it, and we all buy into that to a degree, but we might want to think about some flexibility in how other fundings are done, that some are done by that, but there may be other sort of equity-based things. We've spent in some areas a tremendous amount of money. I mean, a tremendous amount of money, the majority of the money. So just going forward, and I'm not trying to disrupt, just high-level view, we need to be cognizant of that. So when we say, I have to have this project, I'm not supporting it, but we need to remember the history. we're going to have 27 years of history here. And I think we need to just keep that in mind because some cities have not participated at all in the past, haven't really gotten any benefit per se, just as a caution. And we should be flexible and open-minded to that, that's all.
I suspect that our multiple stakeholder groups will help to remind us of that as we go through the process. I have no doubt that we will hear from all sectors. So, yes, well, and we all, yes, and we all recognize that the schedule is very aggressive. But as you all know, we generally take August as a dark month, and allowing staff to have a month without meetings for us lets them have a whole lot more time to get things done in the office. And so they will be working on taking these wish lists, if you will, from the RTPCs and others, and there are going to be others putting their lists together as well, and being able to put them into some form that can come back to us at our September meeting so that we can stay on schedule. And earlier, Martin talked about the schedule for the CTP and the TEP. It's a very aggressive schedule, and we cannot afford to lose any time. So we're all just going to have to, buckle down and get the work done. Dave?
I just was going to say August is a good month to get a new hip if you're so inclined, as long as you're back by September. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. Very good. Don, did you have another
I'd
comment?
move the item.
Okay. I have a motion by Tatson and a second by Hudson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. We are on to 3.4, which is the approval of the formation of the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. And
I'll just kick it off real
Okay.
quick, Madam Chair. So this,
hang on, everybody. Settle down.
So this is the final item that we're asking you to undertake today. As you recall in my presentation, I briefly described the role of an Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. It's something that's worked well for us in the past, and we have a group of eager volunteers, a few of whom are actually in the audience here today. So in your, just want the things I'd like to direct you to in your packet, we describe the categories of individuals that we recruit from. Bill and his team have done a great job. In the handout in front of you are actually some named individuals. So we'll be referring to that. And with that, I just turn it over to Bill, and he can provide a little additional detail and help fill in some of the questions.
Okay, thank you, Ross, and Madam Chair and members of the board. As you recall, last month, basically, you directed staff to come back to you with a recommendation and formation of an Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. And I'd emphasize, as has been in all these presentations, the EPAC is going to be one component of a comprehensive outreach. There's the public outreach, the RTPCs, as we just talked about, a whole variety of input points. The EPAC process, the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee, has worked well in this county, and I was thinking as Ross was reflecting back on the history, we had an initial measure in 1986 that lost, and we did not have a comprehensive public outreach stakeholder involvement. And one element of our Measure C in 1988 was basically an outreach and a consensus-based effort that came together, and that continued very well. And what was interesting to me as I thought about that is that in 1986, we got about 47% of the votes, and it was, at that point, we needed a majority vote. In 88, we got 58%, I think it was, in terms of the votes. And then then the two-thirds vote requirement came in, and that made the consensus process even more important. So as we got into the extension of the measure in 2004, and we ultimately got 72% of the vote there, a lot of that had to do with the success of the authority to date at that point in time, the delivery of projects, and this current group, Ross and Randy, have really continued that, delivery, promises made, promises kept, and I think that's really critically important. But again, that stakeholder outreach, the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee provides a great venue and a great forum to talk about this. Your staff report's pretty comprehensive in front of you. I just make a couple observations. The Purpose of the EPAC is to advise the authority regarding the development of a transportation expenditure plan, and it represents a broad range of stakeholders as evidenced by the list and the memo that Ross provided you in terms of specific folks. Some of the advantages, it's a temporary committee basically established for the purpose of advising your board. It's a single committee where multiple and varied interests can talk and discuss their options. It's a forum for multiple points of view. It provides an opportunity for a structure with a professional facilitator. And in this regard, I would advise that David Early, who actually did this facilitation for us in 2004 and was very well received by a variety of stakeholders, and your board as well has agreed to do it again. So
Yay.
David is starting on that process. He's already actually started. So it provides some really good opportunities included in here, and I won't repeat them all, but there's a series of ground rules that we've always had. It's an open meeting process. All the agendas will be posted on your authority website. The agendas will be there. It's open. All of the various groups, the RTPCs, whoever can come and listen and observe. We're going to suggest at time to time, I think, presentations, because this is just a very, very good forum for doing this. We're talking about having the meetings here in this boardroom. We have to look at the first meeting, see how many people show up and how popular it is, but we'd like to do it here so we can video and audio stream it if possible. Again, it's advisory, and I mentioned that David Early is going to provide that. One of the things that we're here tonight basically is included in Ross's memo is some specific names, and this is a dynamic process. I want to emphasize that is that Eric Zell and Doug Linney have been out basically talking to a lot of folks about participation. They've been a lot of eager, enthusiastic folks that are out there that do want to participate. And as evidenced by the list, we've got, I think, 20 names and alternates there to start the process. We're continuing to look, and talk to groups. I imagine that we'll be back next month with half a dozen more names maybe for participation. But for tonight, we're asking for your support in, one, forming the committee. That's the staff recommendation. And then secondly, making that initial round of appointments. And I'd be happy to go through the categories or else the names, but I don't think that at this point is worth its effort. So,
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to start on this side this time. Newell?
Bill, we don't need to go through the list.
No, I didn't
This
think
is
so.
a good list. You underscored the importance. By the way, under County Office of Education, it's Terry Caney with a T, not a K for Kerry. The only group that's not on here, and it's something we didn't do last time, but it might be, we have a couple of major job centers from going to the south, Bishop Ranch, in Concord, there's Walnut Creek, there's some major job centers. I mean, in terms of their intense users that come in and out every day versus people commuting away. I don't really see a representation in here. While we might not have them tonight, I would support this list. Okay. We might want to think about getting one or two of those people to be represented here because, we talk about all the smart growth and all the ways to do jobs, housing, balance and stuff, but yet here are the job centers. And in San Ramon, they import people. We have a traffic issue there, and it'd be interesting to have their voice be part of this. Other than that, I think we should approve this and add maybe at a later date, find out if there are some key people that would help us.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, I agree with Newell. I will say I think part of that one would assume that they'd be represented in part by the East Bay Economic Development Alliance and by East Bay Leadership Council, but the more the merrier is my answer for this particular group. And I was going to say it on the last item. I decided to hold back, but I threatened at Transpac that I was going to say this at every meeting where we talk about this. The great success of Measure C and Measure J, in my opinion, came from the coalescing of interests into a unified vision that was mostly non-political, mostly apolitical. And every once in a while we get to places where people start to move into political and they start to move into provincial. And that sort of stuff is what people are, it seems to me, are so sick of, both in this county and the state and the federal landscape. And so as we go through these things, my encouragement will continue to be not to get so focused on things like percentages, not to get so focused on things like provincial interests, and to remember that one of the beauties of Measure J is, even though something has a percentage, if you look at the variety of projects and you look at the variety of programs, you can't carve out a particular percentage and allocate it to one thing or another, but it's because it's embedded across the entirety of what we did with the measure, and that's part of why not only were we successful in getting it passed, but why the projects and programs that we've sponsored and funded have indeed been successful and delivered real benefit to the communities that we serve. So to the extent we get more people from more walks into this kind of a process, so we can educate them about that, as well as hear from them and learn from them about what other sorts of things we ought to be focusing on and funding, I'm all for it. So I would second any motion made.
Okay, Karen?
The question I have is, did each of these groups self-select? You had mentioned, Bill, that Eric and your other colleague have been out there doing that, so everybody self-selected.
Yes, they.
Okay.
We contacted the organization and they nominated identified an individual to serve.
And I also heard you say that you'd be back perhaps with some more. I would like, and I've been conferring with Candace, nothing wrong with health services person. He's a fabulous person, but we're having some other conversations internally about planning issues, and so I want to take this back and have a discussion with our Board of Supervisors on who should be representing, and there's a reason that it's health services as opposed to like our transportation people.
Senior services, I think, would may be appropriate.
Well, and see, that doesn't come out as
Yeah.
health services.
Yeah, I
So that's what he's environmental, and so I'm trying to figure out if it has to be health services, or has that slot been there in both C and J?
Well, or was that I'm going to just jump in
Yeah.
response to the letter you received from our health services that wanted a strong emphasis?
I don't want to get too far into this, because Eric and basically had identified the individuals, but I know that we wanted to have the health as a category represented, and I think this is how we gravitated to this, and we will go back.
Well, no, I would like you to let us go back.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back,
Yeah.
but I think obviously you can't.
No.
But we're open. This
No,
is
you
we want
asked
the
me.
right folks to be there. So
Right, and Michael is a fabulous staff person.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure in his current roles in the county, if this is the appropriate person that we want there to fill this need. And so if we've got some time here, our board doesn't meet again until June 9th, but I'll bring it up if Candace will sooner than that with our county administrator. And we'll get back to you either affirming Mr. Kent or getting you another name.
That's fine. We have time.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, which was made by Arnrich and seconded by Durant? All in
Aye.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you to the team. Ross?
May I just add one additional administrative item, if I may? I mentioned it briefly in my presentation. Martin casually mentioned it in his. As you know, we've had a countywide transportation plan ad hoc committee formed to guide us in that effort. Where as we transition our emphasis here to a transportation expenditure plan, we'd like to rename that to be the Transportation Expenditure Plan Ad Hoc Committee with the chair and the board's concurrence.
Right. And the intent of that is to help to distill these items down so that they can come to the full board instead of having to go through each of the subcommittees. And the way we have done over the last year with the countywide transportation plan. So thank you. That is wonderful. We've done very well, folks. The next item on the agenda is item 5.0, correspondence and communications. We have a press release there about a very successful Bike to Work Day. Then we're into associated committee reports. Those are in your packets. Commissioner and staff reports. I have no chair's comments. Commissioner comments and reports on activities. Don.
Just need to report briefly that, assuming all goes well, that the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority will take over control of the rail service on July 1st. We had a successful day with legislatures. The three rail lines, Capital Corridor, San Joaquin, and the Los Angeles Corridor, San Luis Obispo to San Diego, are working together. We have a joint pamphlet that we hand out to all the legislators we meet. There was a select committee on rail of the Assembly and Senate that met last Thursday, and I spoke at that, as did representatives from all the other corridors. So things are moving ahead.
Awesome. That is terrific. Any other commissioner comments or reports? Yes, Chris.
Two things to report. On the 14th, I went to a meeting of the International Partnership Institute, which I had never heard of before, but we're thinking of hiring them to deal with some issues we're having. And I went to a meeting out at the San Francisco Airport. Turns out Randy is on their board, and it turns out at that meeting the authority was getting an award because you do such a good job with partnering. So congratulations.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me. I should report out about that, actually.
Yeah.
I had the honor of attending along with Ivan to receive an award from the International Partnering Institute for the Sand Creek Interchange and for the partnership out there with Bay Cities and C.C. Myers and Parsons Brinkerhoff and the whole group who did such a wonderful job for us in bringing in two bridges in just about the same time as one and in a significant savings in money. So that was pretty awesome to be up there to be able to receive that. And that beautiful piece of crystal is going to go in our trophy case.
It's in there.
So,
I've got a second one.
It's in there.
no, in the trophy case in our offices. So, all right.
I have a second one.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
And tomorrow we're having sort of a whole day with fuel cell stuff at AC Transit. In the morning, we have a United Nations group from about 8 different countries that are coming through. They're going to be looking at our fuel cell stuff in the morning, and then Tesla is picking them up in a bus and taking them down to Tesla. So they were brought in by the governor's GoBiz folks to look at advanced transportation in California. And in the afternoon, and I didn't do the invitations to this, so I assume you're all invited, but the governor and CARB are doing a briefing for local officials on hydrogen transportation, which will feature both the light duty and our heavy duty stuff, which will be from noon to 5 at AC Transit. And as I say, the governor's office handled the invitations. I assume you were all invited, but if you weren't, I will invite you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, other commissioner comments? Seeing none, we will go to executive staff comments. Randy.
Thank you, Commissioner Pierce. And Commissioners, I wanted to, first of all, take some time to thank the team. It's hard to explain this, but we're delivering a $2.5 billion capital program. We're delivering a countywide comprehensive transportation plan, and we're throwing on top of that the components of another potential measure. And we still do that with 20 people and the same consulting staff that we had when we were working on the transportation plan. So I wanted to take time to thank Ross publicly because he and I have worked together for many, many years, and I can tell when he's getting frustrated. So, but he does a great job, and he only complains to me, so you don't have to worry. He'll never complain to you. He'll only complain to me. But I love the guy, and you're doing a great job. So I want to say that, and then I want to recognize Lindsay because we put these PowerPoints together, and they're really just plug and play slides. And I don't want to say that demeaningly because a lot of time goes into each slide, but we use those slides over and over, and we can just plug those in, and the format is really beautiful. So, Lindsay, I know you get frustrated sometimes with me, but you're doing a great job. In fact, most of these guys get frustrated with me, actually. So thank you very much. Stephanie passed her probation, so she's a permanent member of our team, and we really enjoy working with her. Stephanie, you here? There
Yeah,
you are.
she's right there in the back.
Congratulations. So I just want to say that Randy Carlton's doing a heck of a job making sure that, he left this out. He wrote the language in this potential refinancing flexible enough so that we didn't have to go exactly on a certain day. So we don't have to spend a lot of time redoing the paperwork. All we want to do is get your approval, which we got, to move forward when the timing is right. And strike when we get, like last time, we sold and refinanced at the lowest point in the history of the bond market. So I told Randy expectations now are that it's going to be less than 2.11%. So
Now, if the market will just cooperate.
carry forward. Well, that's our proposal. Columbus Day, is our understanding, it's going to be down there very, very low, and so we're excited about Columbus Day. Keep that day in mind. On the director's report, I did participate with Art and Chris Thornburg in a breakfast meeting. The place was packed. They talked about transportation. He talked about the economics, and we had a great audience there. We did meet with Alamo Advertising Group. They're a portion of the Alamo bond people. They sell the bonds locally, and we're trying to put a local connection to our bonds in the future so that when you invest in Contra Costa bond, Transportation Authority bonds, you invest in Contra Costa because that's where the proceeds are being invested. So we're excited about that partnership. I did go to the ITS America Leadership Circle meeting. It was in New York City. On the next page, the key point here is we worked on a number of things, that, including goods movement, which I worked on, and big data and other things. But we met in a company called Uber's headquarters. And I reacquainted myself with a guy named Pete Gould, who used to work for USDOT. Prior to that, he worked for the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And today we had a long conversation, and one of the proposals is on our, what do you call it, Peter? Interactive Dynamic Transit Operations? IDTO. And this connection protection, real-time ride sharing, and dynamic dispatch. We think we can get Uber to help us with three things. One, paratransit. If it's more efficient, that means it's more cost effective and we can do twice as much with the existing dollars. And so we're talking about that. Number two is on this dynamic ride sharing. They're saying, why don't we just pay, and this goes to Supervisor Anderson, rather than use Clipper, they're saying, why don't we just take over the whole trip from the time you get on a bus to the time you get into that Uber vehicle all the way to the end, and we'll just take care of that payment all the whole way. And then the last thing we think that there's a great opportunity there is for our guaranteed ride home. And so, this may be a great opportunity because they do use a voucher system. The thing about if you've ever used Uber, you get in. As long as it's not during surge time, you get out and you pay whatever you pay, but you don't pay anything. All you do is walk out, and it's charged through your smartphone application, and you get a receipt in your email. I mean, it's pretty seamless. And so we think that's a great opportunity. We had a nice conversation today with Pete. He's going to fly out from New York to San Francisco, and Peter Engel and I are going to go meet with those guys to see what we can do there. Did make a presentation to the CAC. It's my first presentation to the Citizen Advisory Committee, and because of that, now I have to go to Oakley and make the same presentation. So I appreciate all the great input from the CAC members. They were really excited about transportation in the future, and so are we. On the last page, I guess, here on page 3.5, we are making progress on 3B. That's the one. That's a project that we advertised, awarded, and administered the construction contract, and the contractor is actually working 10-hour shifts 6 days a week to try to finish the project so the median's ready for BART by the end of February. So. And everything's looking good as long as the concrete and the conditions are right for pouring the concrete. So we're looking at using recycled water, reclaimed water, but misting the concrete during the day so that we don't get cracking. And so we're trying to find a way to mitigate that, to keep that project on schedule, to make all this effort worthwhile. And so that, I think, and then we met with the Consulate General. Two of their staff members were in the audience when I gave a presentation on AV, autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle technology at UC Berkeley, and so they made a point of coming here, and they want their Minister of Transport to meet with us and talk about autonomous vehicles because they're concerned about the environment probably more so than, or as equally as you are, because they're worried about sea level rise because apparently they're very low, and they're worried about water intrusion all the time, and so they want to come here and they wanted to sign an agreement that day, and I said, no, we're not ready to sign an agreement with you. So that's my report. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. No? Yes?
Wrote that. Yeah, it's very disappointing. What happened? What was the barrier?
Tesla was unwilling to give us their social security numbers so we could at least try to get them cleared to get access on the base. And their rationale was we're already cleared to get on a base somewhere else. And it really doesn't matter. If this Army base says we want your information, you're going to give the information or they're not going to let you on. And so we took them out to Willow Pass, I think, to the overcrossing. They got to look down, and we got a really lousy email back from them. And that's what happened.
Randy's worked really hard on this. I just want you to know. And Julie and I met with other interested individuals to try and move forward. But I just want to thank him for that. And we would love to have Tesla, but all they had to do was provide their social security numbers. I mean, this was an ego issue and nothing else.
Well, because that was it, Randy. What I was going to suggest, that's start at the top and work our way down.
I did email Elon Musk, and the rumor now is that I barbecue with Elon on weekends. And so go ahead and spread that rumor if you'd like.
Yeah.
It's good for my reputation, for sure.
Thank you.
But we do have Apple. Apple has signed an NDA with us, and we're waiting until we know we can get them on site. We're waiting until the timing is right, and Apple's just probably as good as Tesla.
Yeah.
And then Uber is looking at testing their own vehicle, so we'll mind that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So we're working very closely with the City of Concord, and we will keep you informed as we go forward on that. Dave?
Yeah, as a point of procedure, I understand that the chair adjourns the meeting. But tonight, the board and staff would like to adjourn this meeting in honor of your father. So if you will allow, we'd like to observe a moment of silence in honor of the memory of Will Barnes. Have a moment of silence, please. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it very much. And we are adjourned.